You're listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. I'm Brian Benham.
And I am Greg Porter. And today we are joined by Curt van Filipowski from Confounded Machine. You can find Curt on Instagram and YouTube. You've been doing a little series lately, Curt, on just kind of almost a daily vlog, but it's not daily. It's every maybe third day or something like that, but following some of the progress of your pen making. And I find it fascinating to watch your entire world. For those who don't know and the uninitiated, Curt is currently making titanium pens, right? That's the only medium you're working in, correct?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, only titanium.
And they are fully titanium all the way down. And we'll get into some details about them and some design related things. But tell me a little bit about what prompted you to start putting those videos out?
I mean, mainly just I wanted to do YouTube videos. I mean, I did a bunch in the past, and then I kept recording and just never had time to put videos together because you start working on a business and then you realize like videos just they don't pay the bills, so they get pushed back. But then part of the reason that I have people that are like knocking on my door buying my product is because of videos. So I'm like, well, I gotta keep releasing these. So I started off at a pretty brisk pace, releasing, I think it was up to like 4 a week. And then, I mean, it's only been doing this for a few months now, trying to get more regular on my uploads. And then I started burning through all my footage. And as I'm getting busier again, I noticed the pace of the videos is starting to slow back down, but I'm going to try to hold it at like 1 or 2 a week. I feel like that's enough to, maintain current. So I'm not sitting on old footage for so long.
Yeah, I have the same problem as that I might get busy or somebody will ask me to do the same thing that I've already built before and already done a video on that. So then it's like, all right, well, I don't want to do another video. And so I have like that whole content hole where I'll go a couple of months without posting anything. So as you're going forward, do you have plans to share more of the how-to behind how you like more details on how you make the pens, or just to keep that content flowing?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, basically, I was kind of questioning myself. I'm like, how many videos can I honestly do of me building pens, which is essentially a repetitive thing. Like I do the same thing over and over and over, but I've done, I don't know, 20 odd videos, 20, 30 videos. And it's like, oh, there's tons of stuff I can share. And just like people geek out on the super minutia. I mean, at least people that are following my channel, like they're totally into spending whatever 5-10 minutes talking about one specific little thing. I think that's the whole reason that they're following me on that specific, platform is just for the super geeky content. So I could probably, go on for a while.
I definitely fall into that category. When the rabbit hole starts to get really deep, that's when I get really, really interested. And I find I was trying to figure out how long I've been following you, Curt, how long that relationship is. And interestingly enough, I pulled out the packaging from the first pen.
That was an old pen.
From 21. So that's 3 years old. And I know I was following you before that. So it's probably been 4 or 5 years now. But I've watched you go through an entire sequence of finishes and materials that has changed dramatically in terms of what your output is. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit is kind of where you started and how that trail has developed over the course of your pen making.
Sure. I mean, like initially I didn't even want to make pens. I was working full time. I went to school for electronic engineering. I kind of did that, and I started dabbling with a lot of CNC. My old boss had me reverse engineering a bunch of weird parts. So he kind of paid me to learn CAD. And once you learn that, it's kind of a slippery slope. So I built a CNC router, and then I just kind of kept going that way. And then I eventually needed to do a little bit of metalworking. I was big into art. I still am big into RC. And that's kind of like if you have a CNC router and then you have something to make round parts, like you can make a lot of parts on these, planes and helicopters. So I just bought a little benchtop lathe and started messing around with it. And I've eventually made myself a pen and just carried it in my pocket and really liked it. And people were like, hey, that's cool. And they pick it up and be like, oh, that's a heavy pen. Can you make me one? And then just slowly started from there. So then I started making brass pens, and I think initially I sold them on Etsy. I sold a bunch of really early, I think they were called the machinist pen. And I sold a bunch of those on Etsy. And I was like, whoa, people will pay me money to make these pens. And then I just played with that for years and just kind of slowly grew it to a point where I was like, you know what? I think I might even be able to leave my job and do something like this. And that's eventually kind of what it's turned into.
Well, so two follow-ups there. You said two things that kind of hit me a little bit. I want to talk about the escape velocity to leave. I don't know if you were in the corporate world, or if you were, maybe not so much in the corporate world, but what that escape velocity is. But the first thing I want to touch on, you said RC, you're flying planes and helicopters,
You bet. Yeah.
and you're still doing that.
Yeah. I mean, it's transition now. I don't fly helis anymore, but I have I have a few, I have a 4-inch quad,
Okay.
like all the FPV ones you see flying around with the big goggles and all that jazz. I got big into that. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. I grew up really wanting to get into RC planes and not having nearly enough money to do so. And so I would go out to the airfield is how we refer to it. I don't know what the right term is there, but there's a big RC community in Kansas City when I lived there, and we'd go out and just watch them. And if I just had an extra $1,000, I could buy the radio.
Yep. Yeah, I think my first electric RC plane, because I had a gas trainer, and then I bought an electric, right when lithium batteries were coming out. I think it cost me $1,400 for a foamy with some basic 4-channel radio. And I mean, now you can get started for $300 and you can have some pretty decent equipment. But yeah, it's a spendy hobby to get into.
It is. And I'll say, I mean, the first reason that I was really interested in it was the making part of it, right? Like, you go to the hobby store and you get an armload of balsa wood and a set of plans, and you set about making this thing that hopefully 2 years from now will be airborne and airworthy. And if not, back to the drawing board. But never got there. And so I've always kind of thought at some point when I retire, maybe that's going to become my hobby.
Oh, get into it now. It's so much easier. It's so much easier to enter. The price is everything is better now. Get into it right now.
I have one too many hobbies right now. No,
fair.
I should say that a different way. I have one too many jobs right now that get in the way of my hobbies. So I'd have to give up a job to do another hobby.
So does the helicopter land within the F whatever regulations for drones? Because I guess drones now you have to have a pilot's license or something.
Yeah.
Does that helicopter land within that those regulations, or is this a whole side tangent that no one pays any attention to?
I mean, thankfully, I grew up in the country, so it was just private land, so I could kind of do relatively what I want, as long as you stay under a certain height. But I mean, it's crazy nowadays. Everything is so different. Weight limits come into play, and I mean, you have to get a license to operate the FPV gear. There's lots of stuff. You used to have to get your ham license to operate some of it, just because you're transmitting at so much power. But now it's gotten so popular that not everyone's going to go out and get their ham license. So yeah, there's a lot of legalities around it. Just, I don't know, try to be a good person. Don't do bad things.
Yeah. If everybody only followed that path, that montage.
Yeah.
Kind of coming back around, your job as an electronics engineer or electrical engineer, is that how did you say that?
Electronic. It was a trade school. It was electronic engineering tech is I think what the actual program was. So
was that designing circuits, or what did you come out doing?
That basically, it was all it's low voltage. So integrated circuits, a little bit of computer sciencey kind of stuff in there. I basically came out with knowledge to, I don't know, do repair work, design work for PCBs and microcontrollers. I mean, it was dated technology when I was taking it. We were learning assembly and all kinds of really old tech. But I ended up coming out and working in an arm of the oil field up here, doing some electronics work. So that was nice while it lasted. Or I mean, it lasted, but before I got tired of it. So
yeah, well, I think with anything, you can burn out pretty easily. And then there are other things like machining that are a pretty enticing thing if you can figure out. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. There's this notion I have of an escape velocity. I think a lot of folks in the I'll call it the maker world, the machining world, are people who are working at night in their garage on secondhand machinery that they've bought to try and, figure out something, whatever that is. It could be RC parts or something. But once you get into it, there's this really strange draw to understanding automation and production and efficiencies. And that rabbit hole starts getting very deep. But once you've shoveled out a few loads of dirt, you realize that there's an awful lot of money to be made in this industry. And I think you have an advantage. You're up in Canada. You have an advantage with social medicine that we don't have down here. That keeps a lot of people handcuffed to their job, because the alternative of not having that corporate healthcare is that you have to pay it yourself, and it's really darn expensive. But what was that decision-making process like for you when you were making money on the side, doing probably that analysis of how much can I make if I do this more, and what's my risk?
I don't even know if I have it fully solved yet. But like basically just I was lucky enough that I had a day job that paid decently well, and I was able to put money aside. So I had a long runway of time where I could figure this out. So I kind of just slowly chipped away at it. And I mean, I worked evenings and weekends, like I said, every spare minute for years, trying to figure out if I could ever push it hard enough to make it go. And then I basically got to a point where I would work all day and then come home and like work all night, and then, not see my wife or anything, and then be like, okay, I can't go on this forever. I know how much I can make at this current state, but if I had, 8 more hours, or, if I had a whole more day to play with this, I could squeak by. Like I could make our bills. We wouldn't be making good money, but I could live. And I'm like, and then that would just buy me more time to run and figure this out. And that's basically the choice I made. I mean, I had little bit of the luxuries of, I didn't have a lot of things depending on me at that point. Our financial situation was okay, so I could take a bit of a risk. So that was basically the call I made. I mean, and now I'm like just now am starting to kind of parallel what I was making in the corporate world, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a tough slog. But like you said, it's super addicting because there's no start and end point. Like working at a day job, you have kind of like if you get paid X amount of dollars, you're only going to make X amount of dollars more. Like you're never going to 10 times your salary or 100 times it. Whereas like working for yourself, the sky's the limit. Like you can also go to the very bottom, but you can also go to the top. So it's addicting for sure.
Well, I wish I could remember the account, but there's a machinist who has, I think it's like a Haas and a brother and maybe 1 or 2 other machines in his garage. And then he's got a robot arm for each one of them. So, it's a cell basically with a robot feeding parts. So every single thing is automated, but this guy also has a full-time day job. And so he goes out in the morning and lays out all the parts.
Yeah.
And then he hits the button on all 4 machines and leaves for work for the day, and then comes home and collects all the parts up. And I'm watching him going, this guy is probably 5Xing his income by doing this. Like don't get me wrong. I'm guessing he has a person cutting material. The supplier he gets it from may be cutting it, and he probably pays a premium, but he's able to just put those blanks in the cells and go. And it's just fascinating. I wish I could remember the account, but
I'm pretty sure I follow that dude. He's got like, it's a super, like you said, I always see him opening his garage and just kind of peeking around. He's got a bunch of robots and an arm and like a little fixture station there. Yeah. That's the dream, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Part in one box and finished part out the other box.
Yeah. And I say that because that's where the rabbit hole is. Like this guy is in it and he's realized that as long as he can pay his electric bill, he has 4 employees that work full time for him for $0, other than, whatever the borrowing interest is on those machines.
Right. Yeah, no, totally.
So,
sorry, Brian.
No, that's okay. So speaking of rabbit holes, I was watching your channel and was watching you anodize stuff, and you basically dipped the pen into the anodizing,
Mhm.
And it, like, within seconds, it's just like going through a range of colors. Like, I want to know how that happens. Like, and like when you get to a color, how do you know when to pull it out before it changes to a different color? Or how do you control the anodizing?
That's a really cool area where titanium is kind of a super unique metal. Like you can anodize a lot of things with dyes, but titanium just anodizes with pure voltage. So, you don't need you can anodize titanium in Coke. Like you don't need a crazy electrolyte or anything. You just need voltage. So you put a piece of titanium, clean titanium into some anodizing bath and hit it with a certain amount of voltage, like 24-ish volts is going to get you blue. Like no matter what, you're going to get a blue, a very close to a blue. And like, so it has a spectrum and you just go through the voltage spectrum and you get the color. And it's just building up an oxide layer on the titanium that hits, the light hits it and you see a different color. Technically the oxide layer is clear. We just see it as a color when the light hits it, which is kind of a mind melter. But yeah, so to do those rainbows, the voltage just be set high, like to the highest voltage I want. And then as it's anodizing, I just slowly pull it out of the bath as all the colors kind of come into where I want them to be.
So that creates the gradient, is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah.
Great. But if you wanted, so on the one that I watched, it started out like yellow.
Mhm.
So how did you control the voltage to go from yellow to purple when you're
Oh,
holding onto the thing, or was I missing something in the video?
It's likely that I had it set to go to purple. So like purple is a 68 volts. So as soon as I connected it, if both hands were in the shot, it's just the bath was coming up to voltage and there's some, it just basically takes a little bit of time for the anodizing layer to build up. So you probably see it cycle through all the color spectrum before purple. And then as soon as it starts nearing the voltage that purple's at, it just slows down and then it stops at purple. So that's probably how it, yeah.
I got it. So now my next question is, this is top secret. You don't have to disclose this on the podcast, because I understand there are some things that I do that I don't really like. If someone really wanted to know, they could figure it out, but I don't. I wanted to make it difficult to hold my thing, but
Sure.
I am really curious how this is done. This pen with all these different kinds of swirls of color and
Yes.
things.
Yeah. So that's like I don't want to gatekeep knowledge. People have taught me a bunch of stuff. So that's called entropic anodizing. I'm not going to tell people how to do it because you can look it up and find it. And honestly, that's probably the bigger barrier for most people, just the actual looking it up.
Yeah.
But there's loads of great videos on it, and it's the exact same process. You do it with a couple different. It's done with heat and acid essentially. But it's an easy process to do, and it's a super annoying process to do well and repeated. So it's kind of a nice like a fail safe to keep a lot of people from doing it, because it's complicated and it's annoying and it's caused me lots of tears in the past. But it's a super striking kind of visual anodize for sure.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Is
go
that
ahead, Brian.
it's okay. Is that titanium on that one as well?
Yeah, you bet. That's all titanium. Pretty much, I think everything on my page is going to be titanium.
All right. Can you do that technique on other things like aluminum or something?
Not that I know of. I mean, with masking and anodizing, you might be able to get something similar. But as far as I know, only titanium is titanium and maybe zirconium. Some of the exotics are the only ones that kind of exhibit that weird kind of
Pattern,
entropic
crazy
effect.
pattern. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
I kind of feel like maybe at some point in my life, I'm going to have the bandwidth to be the crazy scientist. And that, as we're looking at that and you're asking your question, Brian, I'm thinking, why couldn't you in an anodizing bath for aluminum swirl in some 50 weight motor oil and affect, because aluminum's anodizing can be affected by its ability to stick. So one of the great ways to mask aluminum is to anodize a certain part of it and then scrape off that anodizing and then re-anodize, and that becomes the new, the old stays the same because it can't re-anodize. I wonder if there's a masking tech. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off the deep end. One of these days I'll have enough time to do all these wacky experiments.
So your theory is to like paint on oil in a swirled pattern, and that would be the mask, and then anodize the rest of the pen.
Or being in the guitar world, there's a swirl painting technique for guitars that people who are into guitars, like there's people who are really good at swirling guitars. Okay. And the technique is you fill up a 50-gallon trash can with water, and then you take colors of paint and you let them sit on the surface of the water, and then you dunk it in just like they do hydro dipping now with guns and things of that nature. But the water is what makes it all go, right? Like it's very simple technique when you look at it, but when you see a painted guitar like that, it's like, oh wow, it's like a tie-dye, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just tend to believe there's probably a way to anodize aluminum like that. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm sure you are. There's people doing fantastic. I've seen some really amazing aluminum anodizing. We're like, what? How do they do? And you're trying to think it through, like, how do they mask that, or what do they? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, good gravy. I have, I don't know how many thousands of parts anodized a year, and we get a lot back with, errors in the finish and things of that nature. And when you ask about it, it's like, oh yeah, the de-smut didn't get cleaned off of it, so it had extra whatever. I don't know what smut is, but it had that on it when it went into tank number 2 or 3 or whatever it was. But yeah, so you would intentionally screw it up in a very cool swirly pattern, I suppose. But well, so kind of turning back a little bit, you started in brass, right? And I'm saying that like it's a fact. I should be asking, did you in fact start in brass, Curt? Is that where you started life in the machining world?
Actually, the very first pen I made out of just like a silver steel, like a tool steel rod, just because I had a bunch of them floating around. But most of the like products I actually made for people was brass, just because it's such an easy material to work with.
Okay. And then as you, for those who may be watching this, I have one of Curt's early pens. I think these were early. I'm saying that this was number 94 of the Flux series. Back in the
older pen. Yeah.
Yeah. And this, anyway, but this is a brass pen, right? With a really cool patina finish on there, which I'm guessing you did that with acids and things of that nature, and then kind of washed them.
Yeah, on brass that would have been done probably with like an ammonia or salt. There's a billion ways to do it, but you're essentially just doing a forced patina. And brass is cool just because you get the greens and blues and really nice colors. And I think those ones are all clear Cerakoted as well, when they were done, just to try to protect that patina, keep it from wearing off so quickly.
Well, this is my shop pen.
Right.
Which I think most people would cringe at that. And it's like, well, if I have things I like, I actually put them where I use them all the time. So it's my shop pen. It gets knocked around and the finish is perfect. There's not a single blemish on there. So
cool.
I guess that's a good advertisement for Cerakote in terms of the durability of that finish. One of the cool little details that I find on this pen, and I don't know if most people would notice it, but the screw in the end is blued. I'm guessing that's a steel screw.
I think that was right when I switched over to titanium screws as well.
Okay.
So that's probably a titanium screw as well. Yeah. That was right on the, I used to have steel screws for the longest time. And then I made titanium and I'm like, how am I going to get a magnet to stick to titanium? So there's a magnet inside that screw so that the other side would stick to it. And those are fun pens to make. I kind of miss doing those.
Yeah. I don't know. Every time I look at it, it's just one of those little details. It's like there's a shoe designer, and I can't remember who it is, that makes the soles of their shoes red, and it's something that you don't see. You just catch a glimpse of it every once in a while. And I feel like that's one of those little design details that it's like the author of this piece really thought about this. It's not just a McMaster Carr catalog item. This is something special for this pen.
Yeah, I like manufacturers that do. I mean, love or hate Apple, whatever you think. I mean, I think it's cool that they do branding like inside all their devices. Like you're never going to see that unless you tear it apart. It's like, no, there's a little branding in there. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of like the titanium springs that you
yeah.
do. I was very fascinated watching you just like by hand make a spring. Just
yeah, that was more out of necessity than anything. I mean, I wish I could have just bought those springs, but I kind of designed myself into a bit of a tight corner, so ended up having to make mine. And then I liked them. But the new pen I just made, I'm now going through the exact same thing where I'm having to fight with springs. So likely making my own springs once again.
I saw your Instagram. I get them screwed up now. I don't know if they're reels or stories or what they're
Right.
called, but I saw you in a video format on Instagram, and I think it was 5 or 6 springs laid out on the table. And I thought, oh no, here we go.
So what's the challenge of having, why do you have to make your own and you're not able to purchase them?
For the last pen I made, I mean, technically I could purchase them. I couldn't purchase them in stainless. Like I could purchase them in zinc, but I mean, the whole pen being titanium, I didn't really want to put like a standard steel zinc spring. You're buying a $200 pen. It better have a good spring in it, at least in my opinion. So then I started looking at titanium springs. Then I realized I couldn't buy them, and I'm like, I'll just make 1 or 2 to get me through until I, find a source. And then 1 or 2 turned into hundreds, and then you get yourself in kind of a situation where like, well, it doesn't take me long to make them. And then, then before you know it, you're a spring maker. So it's something I'm trying to avoid now.
Well, it only takes you a couple of seconds unless the video was sped up, but it seemed like you just like, and you were done with each one.
Oh yeah, they don't take long, but I mean, I gotta buy titanium wire, and then I gotta make the spring, then I gotta clean the spring, then I gotta anodize the spring, and then I inevitably scrap a few. And yeah, it only takes me 30 seconds to make a spring, but it would just be so much nicer just to buy a spring
and drop it in there. Yeah,
exactly, and just be done with it. So
I'll talk about this rabbit hole, and of course I can't see it on there now. There it is. In the guitar world, when you're putting on strings on a guitar, a lot of people use a string winder, and it's just like, this is a 50-cent plastic part that everybody has in their case, and they wind their strings on. There's a machinist named Frank Ford who makes these.
Nice.
And this is the smoothest. There's a sleeve and a pin and something else inside of this handle. He has photographs of him making this entire thing. And I can't remember how many parts are involved in here, but everything is made by hand and everything is done to this exceptional tolerance level. And when you wind a string with this, you're like, oh man, I have hit the big leagues. and when I saw, first off, I was amazed that Frank put his entire process out there for the world to see, because somebody could rip it off, right? And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, no one in their right mind would make this thing like Frank does, because it takes so darn long and it has so many parts. But my point is, I feel like when you're designing something, there's a point at which you become a slave to that design, and you have to make the decision that I'm going to do whatever it is I need to do to make this thing come out the way that it needs to come out. And once you sort of put your head down and you go, yep, I'm going to let the design win this time, everything goes up an order of magnitude in terms of quality, how it feels in your hand, how it looks, what the customer experience is. I feel like, Curt, I feel like you've gotten there. You've gone to that crazy space of how good can I get this bolt action? I saw you the other day talking about the piston fit, and it's just like, he's gotten there. This is awesome.
Well, it's fun just to be able to like go so deep onto some little tiny product, and then just, just make it ridiculous. And people like that. Like, people buy $3,000 knives when a $20 knife accomplishes the same thing. It's not because it cuts things. It's because they get enjoyment out of the way it moves, or the way it opens, or the way it feels in their hands. Or like, Brian, I'm sure you're the same. A $20 IKEA table does the same thing as one of your tables that you make. It holds up my plate while I'm eating it, but you're busy.
Yeah,
like,
there's
there's a difference.
Yeah, there's a feeling in quality. Like, you buy I'm going to pick on Festool again. You buy Festool, it's supposed to be this quality tool, but it's made out of plastic. This fall, I went and visited my parents. They live in Oregon. And so I flew out there, and I'm in my dad's shop, and my dad has a lot of my old grandfather's tools. And to pick up a sander that has an aluminum casing to it, the thing has like this feeling of quality, this feeling of heft. And people complain about vibration and sanding, but this thing had no vibration, just because it was so heavy in your hand. So it was like this joy to hold this thing. I was like, like waiting for my dad to die so I can go get this sander, you know, because it felt so good in my hand. And like all those tools from my grandfather's era from the 1930s are just great. They just have this great sense of heft and quality to them. When you pick them up, you know, you're holding something quality, to where now everything's made out of plastic and yeah, it's lightweight, but it just doesn't have the same feeling, you know?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
I find it interesting, and it probably is, you know, right. There's a balance between when you're young and you have no money, you can't afford to buy the things that you really probably should be buying or would want to buy. And I find the older I get, the more I'm like, forget it. I'm not buying the cheap thing anymore for any reason, on any account. There's this person over here who's exceptionally talented, who's designed this thing. I don't care what it is. I'm going to support that effort because I believe the universe needs these things. And I don't think that was always the case. You know, when, you know, you rewind the clock 80 years, there was one version of things. And the company that was making that version of things was trying to make a name for themselves. And so, you know, I always go back to the Stanley planes. You know, I've got a number 8 that's like 10 feet long. And I don't know how old it is. It's ancient. I think it's on this side of the century mark, but it might not be. And, you know, 100 years later, it's still holding up. And I would put it against any brand new surface ground Lee Nielsen plane any day. And it's amazing how that works.
Yeah, we're getting to a point in our society, unfortunately, where it's becoming to cost more to throw it away than it is to buy it.
Yeah,
I mean, your garbage bill's becoming higher and higher because you keep throwing so much in there.
Well,
that's what I was trying to say.
That's kind of the cool thing, I think, right now is like there seems to be, I don't want to say like a resurgence because it's probably been happening for like a very long time, but a lot of people want to buy something that is like well made. And I shouldn't say a lot of people in like my world. So I have a small view of what I see of, you know, the general populace, but yeah, people are buying tons of, you know, inexpensive stuff from, you know, various sources, but people are also willing to shell out good money for something that they feel is, you know, made really well. So I don't know. I think that's really cool. Like the race to the bottom is a scary race to be in. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be making a cheap product because it's so easy to get knocked off. And then like, yeah.
Yeah. So is that what drove you into making your own concrete lathe? I want to know about the concrete lathe. Is that still in your shop and still functioning?
Oh, no, that went out to the concrete lathe farm in the sky a long time ago, unfortunately. That was initially when I wanted a lathe and I was like, I could probably build one. And I found some plans for one and I ended up talking with the designer who made these plans and no one ever built one. And so he said, whoever builds one, I'll give you a prize if you build one. So I built one and then he actually sent me a big like 10-inch three jaw chuck for it. And I still have sitting on one of my shelves back here just for the fun of it. But it worked. You'd never use it for anything other than, I mean, if it was if we had nuclear winter or something like that and you had to build your own lathe, at least I have the tech, like I know how to make it now, but it's not going to compete with even the $1,000 lathe that you get at your, discount stores. It was more of a fun project than anything.
Yeah. I had a fun time watching. I watched that whole series. It was great.
Oh, thanks.
Well, great segue there in terms of making tools and being ultra familiar with the tools that you use. I want to talk about your lathe a little bit. It's a Hardinge, right? Am I saying that right?
I've heard it said both ways. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a lathe that's 30 years old, 40 years old.
Yeah, I think this one's about a mid-70s vintage. Yeah.
Mid-70s. Oh, well, and 50 years old. Yeah.
That's old.
It's not that old. I'm from that vintage of the mid-70s. But the thing that I find fascinating, and maybe this is that electronics background, is you got in there and almost gutted it electronics wise, right? With maybe a few exceptions, and I'm digging back. That's been at least a year, maybe 2 years ago that you did all of that work, I believe. But But talk to me about that process a little bit. You went out and bought this thing knowing that you were going to have to tear into it, I'm sure. And where did it go from there, I guess?
So I knew a guy on Instagram, Dr. Phil. He used to live just south of me a few hours, and he initially picked up that lathe from just actually from the original owner, as far as I know, and put it in his garage with the intent to convert it. So he was chatting with me of what he should put on it, and I said, hey, if you're ever like looking to get rid of it, keep me in mind. And I didn't expect anything of it. And about like I don't know 6 months later, a year later, he's like, hey, I got to get rid of this lathe. Do you want it? So and I came down, took a peek at it, and it's a nice lathe because it's like a perfect garage size machine.
Yeah.
It's like 3,000 pounds, 6 feet wide and 5 feet tall or something. Like it's tiny enough to fit into a garage. But it needed new everything because it was tape driven. Like it had an equally sized cabinet that came along with it. That I unfortunately didn't have, that had all like the servo amps, and it would read punch cards to do all the CNC cutting. I mean, they're really, really tight machines. Like they easily hold, sub 10th measurements all day, or like cuts all day. So I was excited to get one. I just didn't know the condition of it. So it was inexpensive enough that I bought it, and basically just had to revive it because to buy this servo amps to drive it, it was going to be more costly than the entire lathe was worth. So I gutted it completely and then just put modern electronics into it and then a modern control onto it. I'm just reusing all the old mechanics, which thankfully were in great shape because all those old machines were oil-based machines. So they never really rusted because they're just constantly bathed in oil. And yeah, it's a wonderful little lathe. I quite like it now.
I've been watching you hold, I know it was half a thousand. So I think it was down to either 1 or 2/10 in some of your micrometer segments that you've posted. And it's just like, God, that is normal people don't understand how small that tolerance is. So if you took a piece of paper at 3/1000 of an inch, it is 30 times thinner than a piece of paper. So you take a piece of paper and divide it 30 times, and that's 1/10. And being able to repeat that over and over. A speck of dust is what, 3 times that size, 4 times that size?
Oh, I know. Like people don't understand how insane that is. To have any kind of piece of mechanical whatever repeat that well is ridiculous. And to do it over and over and I mean, modern equipment, can do better than there are people working in a, order of magnitude finer than that nowadays, which is mind boggling. Like you can't even have rooms that are fluctuating in temperatures because it'll throw your measurements out. Like it's an insanely small value.
I can remember, so my wife's grandfather was not a mechanic, a machinist for TWA. So he worked on airplane parts, and I'll tell the story very quickly. He was the only person in the world certified to work on rotating Rolls-Royce bearings because Rolls-Royce didn't want anyone doing it. He figured out a technique to work on them. So they flew him out and whatever. He walked through all of their dog and pony show and made them believers. And that was that. So he was the only one certified in the world to do certain things, but he was holding, it would be 2/10 on some bearing that I can't remember if it was a bearing or if it was a race or what it was. And we were talking about that, and he goes, I would finish a part and I would measure it for tolerance, send it through. I think they had 2 inspections. So they had a TWA inspector, but then they had the FAA inspector. And he said from the time that it passed from his inspector to the FAA inspector, it was out of tolerance. Then they would bring it back and it would measure in tolerance. And then it would go back, and they realized that the room temperature between the 2 inspection spots was off like 5 degrees. And that was enough to screw the tolerance up. It was like, are you kidding me? So
that's ridiculous.
So how, when this thing is in use, how are they going to even control those tolerances? That's nuts.
And again, this is the interesting thing is, and I could go all the way down this rabbit hole. His argument was he would get parts, brand new parts from Rolls-Royce that would not meet their remanufacturing specifications. So the thing comes off of an airplane, because he worked in the overhaul, right? After so many flight hours, they take it all apart. They inspect everything. If something doesn't meet the tolerance, it goes over here and either gets fixed, thrown away and replaced, or, whatever. So he would take the parts off and they would meet the new part spec, but they wouldn't meet the overhaul spec. So then he would have to fix them. And his complaint was the new parts don't even meet the overhaul spec. So you can imagine Rolls-Royce is in the business to make money. So they're not going to make it easy to remanufacture their parts. They're going to make it difficult. So it's not that hard to put a jet engine together with brand new parts, piece of cake. But if you're remanning the parts, you have to be a lot tighter tolerance. So anyway, just kind of weird how the politics works behind the scenes sometimes.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of a video that Adam Savage did a while ago. He was showing off one of his new measuring devices, and he just held a steel ball in his hand for just a few seconds, and he was able to measure a distance just from the heat causing the steel to expand just that tiny, tiny amount.
Yeah, well, like lots of people don't like, or I have it around here, like micrometers, like they have the little plastic handles on the side. People are like, oh, it's full of plastic. It's like, no, the plastic is what you're supposed to hold on to, because you don't want to transfer heat into the little cast iron, because it'll change the instrument, then you can't measure with it. Like it's
so plastic does have a place in the world.
It does have a place, you bet.
Well, there's another rabbit hole that I'm starting to go down. Speaking of plastics, Curt, you turned me on to the resin printers. And it was something that, we all see them, like it wasn't like I was completely unaware of them, but I didn't realize how good the homebrew version, or not homebrew, but the DIY version of the resin printers has gotten. I am amazed at the tolerance those things are holding. It's 50 microns between layers or something like that. So I'm trying to equate 50 microns to a measurement that I can realize what I don't know how many thousandths that is.
I think it's 3.
3 thousandths.
I think I might be horribly wrong.
Okay. So, well, but that sounds about right. So your layers in your 3D print are basically like 3 pieces of paper thick now, instead of, I think the extruder that I have over here is like a 30 thousandths or something like that. So significantly smaller, and the detail and the smoothness, and they even have anti-aliasing features that plug in. They're so good.
I know, it blew my mind too. I'm kind of with you on the same boat. It's just like, what? This is possible for like this amount of money? This is insane.
Yeah, and some of your pen parts, your production parts, are being made on the resin printer now, right?
Yeah, I had one plastic spacer that I was machining for a while, just out of like a Seidel or Delrin. And I decided to try printing it. I could get a little fancier. I could do things that I couldn't do with machining, or couldn't easily do with machining. And it worked well. And it was within, I only had to hold, I think, plus minus a thou on the part. And I'm just kind of wondering if the resin printer could do it. And I had a friend print me some, and I was like, holy smokes, these are way better than I thought. Like I looked at them 5 years ago and I was like, seems like a lot of effort. And yeah, the new ones, I'm like, wow, this is quite impressive.
Now I'll have to not confess necessarily. I just got one of your pens a few weeks ago. I got back we went and visited family over the holidays, and I got back, and that was in my mailbox, and it was like, late Christmas presents. But I haven't taken it apart yet to look at all the guts. That's coming because I have to. But the part that you're resin printing is, I'm speaking from the pictures, but it looks like maybe a 1/4 inch tall, something like that. And you're able to actually put text around it, like, wedding band style text, right, around it. And that's the level of detail that these resin printers are holding. For those who don't know, like, it is it's like smaller than typewriter size font on plastic parts with 3-dimensional depth.
Oh yeah, and you can go 10 times smaller. Like I think that text on that specific part is 80 thou tall and 5 thou deep. And you could drop it down to 10 thou tall and it's still visible. Like you have to use a micro or a loop at that point, but ridiculous. Like that's just, I can't believe that's possible with like home printers.
Yeah. And so I saw Curt. So this is, I think this is an interesting thing. I think as designers, as people who make things, we have to constantly be aware of what's going on around us, because if you're not an open channel, you're not letting people inspire you, whatever that means, you know? And whenever I'm flipping through Instagram or YouTube or whatever else, I'm always taking those mental notes. Like, this is a cool thing. This person is doing cool things with it. Put it in the back of your brain. When you have an idea, remember that this thing exists and that you can do something with it too. And anyway, I let you inspire me. I bought one of these things and I thought, all right, what are we going to do? And, you know, immediately started printing things out that are literally, we were going to injection mold some parts, and it's been a slow slog on the injection molding side. There's a not necessarily a learning curve, but there's a lot of things to do before you get your first part on the mold side of things. And anyway, it was like, wait a minute, I can bypass all of that headache right now and start making parts that are literally nice enough to sell as a commercial item and not home printed thing. You know, they just don't have that look to them. And anyway, so yeah, we're currently making parts for sale on that resin printer. It's a money generator.
That's wild. That's so cool.
So
does the resin printer print faster than a PLA? Because
not even close.
it's close, because I printed this thing and it was like a full day.
Oh, well, yeah, it would print faster than that. I want to, so resin printers don't care how complicated it is. They don't care what size the part is in X and Y. They only care the size in Z. So the taller your part is, the slower it prints. So it's got a platform, and then it exposes a plate. The one that we have is maybe like 2 inches by 4.5, something like that. It's not very big.
Tiny, yeah.
It's this size. It's the size of a phone.
Okay.
And it's got an ultraviolet light bulb of some kind and an LCD or whatever, the DLP, there it is, the DLP chip that just like a projector projects it to the surface and then exposes an ultraviolet sensitive resin to the bottom of the plate. And then the plate moves up 9 thousandths of an inch, if that's the measurement. And then it does it again, and it does it again, and it does it again. So it moves at 9 thousandths of an inch at a time. And it takes about 4 to 5 seconds for each level to expose, maybe.
So it's basically taking a picture, but not necessarily a picture, but it's freezing that across the whole thing. So it's not like a PLA printer where it has to zigzag back and forth across the whole thing, taking forever.
So the PLA is the pen plotter back in the old CAD days. Yeah. And this is the laser printer, but it prints very, very thin layers. So, but I want to say, I had a print that was probably 1.5 inches tall that took 3 hours. Sounds about right. But you can print 5 of those things if they'll fit on the plate, and it takes the exact same time.
Exactly.
Curt, you're doing like 20 parts at a time, right?
I think one of them, those small parts, is like 100 parts on a plate, and it only takes half an hour to print them because they're only 1/4 inch tall. And like you said, the complexity doesn't matter. So I could just get crazy with the complexity and just let it run. And if it fails, oh well, I've wasted $1 of resin, and you know, I'd fire it up at night because there's literally there's no risk really. I mean, the DLP generates, I think, 4 watts of heat. And that's about it. So I'm comfortable running that overnight, no problem. And yeah, it's a wild process. I looked it up. 25 microns is about a thou. So,
okay. Yeah. So 2 thou.
2 thou. Yeah. Ridiculous.
Wow. That's crazy. I don't know. We live in a really cool time and space that, you know, if I would have been born 40 years prior, you miss this stuff completely, right? Or probably 90-year-olds.
I was talking with somebody just a while back. They're like, your business probably wouldn't succeed, 15 years ago. I'm like, no, it would have been wildly different. Cause I mean, like it or hate social media, like it's opened the world up to people like me working in my garage. Like I've sold more product, 1,000 miles away from me than I've ever sold locally. It's a wild thing.
Yeah. And you're able to get into other markets. Like for furniture, it costs like on average to have a piece of furniture shipped to another state is $1,000 to $1,500 blanket wrapped, delivered to the homeowner. And I've shipped stuff to California, not super regularly, but enough to know that my price to pay me a livable wage here in Colorado is cheaper than California, so I can compete in the California market.
Oh, that's cool.
And
that's cool.
all just through social media is how those people generally find me.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
Oh, that's a whole other headache. I guess I'm saying it this way: shipping, fine furniture across the country. I just boxed up a piece for a gallery show at one of the universities in Missouri, and they had this whole list of, it needs to be crated this way and done this way and that way, and I'm like, you know what? I'm the owner of this thing, and I'm the guy who built it, and it's already got one little nick in it. If it gets nicked again, I'm not building a crate. Not today.
Yeah. So blanket wrap shipping is way easier than crating, because crating, you got some guy that doesn't give a shit driving a forklift, just slamming that thing around. Blanket wrap, they come, they photograph it, they wrap it themselves in moving blankets, and then they strap it to the wall of the truck, and then they go to the next place and strap the next one on the other side of the wall of the truck or whatever, and then when they deliver, they just unwrap it, so there's no forklifts being slammed into anything. There's less damage. Every UPS thing, FedEx thing, all those freight companies, they're all like, all right, well, you're buying me a new piece now because you busted it. But blanket wrap, never a problem.
Well, that's great to hear. I sent a guitar too, so I put the guitar in a flight case, so I think it's going to be okay. But anyway,
I still don't envy your world, Brian. I mean, I guess you're not shipping 10 dressers a day either, but
no,
that still sounds terrifying.
Shipping is always a headache and terrifying, but yeah.
I don't know, Curt, do you ship around the world too, or are you just US and Canada? Yeah, around the world.
Yeah, internationally. Yeah.
I find it fascinating that, I mean, again, 30 years ago, this wasn't the case. Like, somebody in Germany wouldn't be logged in to watch you do what you do and say, wow, I need one of those. And, it's our reach is pretty amazing, I suppose, when you think about it.
Yeah. So international shipping, what kind of, do you have like a whole bunch of hoops and laws to jump through to get something from Canada to, I imagine the US is pretty easy, but like New Zealand or wherever else in the world you ship to?
Not so much. I mean, there's just thankfully at my old job, I did a lot of shipping of parts. So, I mean, you put your codes, you basically tell it, what you're shipping, and declare how much it is. That's basically all they want. They just want their cut out of it. And it's pretty easy, especially with metals. Woods, that's kind of the reason it's nice working in metals, is woods are a little bit weird, or they kind of are more stingy on that stuff. But metals, they really don't care. As long as you follow the rules and be a good boy, everything seems to work out.
Well, let's talk about design just a little bit. And with some of the different iterations that you've had, and we'll talk about the pen world, but if you want to expand it to other worlds, that's fine too. But how many iterations do you get through before you find a pattern or a texture or a way of assembling things that you're very happy with? How long is that process, and what does that kind of look like?
I don't know if it ever stops. Like, from when I started making, like, the bolt action pens have been my most popular pen, and it's basically all I make right now. I used to make a bunch of stuff, and now I just solely make that single pen. And just like every single batch, there would always be something minor. 99 out of 100 people wouldn't notice the change, but it was just something small. Like I would change the way whatever threading worked, or change a tolerance, or move something, or put a chamfer slightly bigger, slightly small. So I don't know. I think it's just constantly evolving. I don't think there's ever, like, if I look at my iteration count in like Fusion or something like that, yeah, it'd be thousands. But like, from a raw idea to something that I'm going to sell, I don't know, maybe 20 revisions or something like that. of part, like not full prototypes, and maybe partial prototypes till I get something. And it depends on the complexity, I suppose, as well. But in my world, that's about kind of how long it takes me to get something I'm happy with, happy releasing into the wild.
Yeah. I asked that because it is so easy to, when you're making one of something, it's very different than making 100 of something. And I don't mean that in a good way versus a bad way. It's just a very different thing. And when you're making one of something, when you make a move, you have to be confident that that's the right move because you can't undo it sometimes. But when you're making 100 of something, you can undo anything, and you can undo anything at any time. And so there's a different level of commitment. And I would say on making one of something, when you're going to make that move, you got to be committed to that move. But when you're going to make 100 of them, there's a whole different thought process of, do I need to change this 3 or 4 more times and go through a couple more samples and a few more prototypes and nail it, because I'm going to be using this over and over and over again.
No, yeah, totally. And I mean, part of me also doesn't want to, like, I don't want to screw past people that bought one of my pens, and let's say down the road, a year down the road, they want a replacement part for something. That gets, like, especially when you're getting tighter and tighter and tighter tolerances, it's like, okay, I got to make sure that I have masters right now so that, years down the road when I'm making, tweaks to the design, it's still backwards compatible with what's out there. And for the most part, I can usually send out a product, like I'll put it on the low end of the tolerance range if I have to replace something for somebody. But I mean, most people don't expect that out of a pen either. And thankfully I haven't had to do that a ton. But yeah, that's something that always crosses my mind. Like, how far can I advance before I have to kind of like cut it and then make a new product out of it, where you're just kind of hamstrung by your past choices.
Yeah. So do you keep track of all the other stuff? You said you had masters. Is that like, so you can go back and like test the fit if you needed to do any kind of warranty work?
Yeah, you bet. Like, I'll have just recently, so I'll build a master that I can always cross compare to. And like, I have jigs, but I also have a master that I never touch, because I'll have like go and no go gauges for specific parts that I've made for pens. But as you use them, they start to wear. And then if you keep using them and they keep wearing, you start adjusting your tolerance to the worn part. And then, after X amount of time of, using that part as a test piece, you're so far out of tolerance that it wouldn't fit the original part. So then I have masters that I don't touch that I have to cross compare my masters with. And it's like, it's just, yeah, it's turtles all the way down. So that was part of the, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's part of the scary thing on my end with furniture and things, is that I would have to have them send it back because I keep nothing, and I have no cataloging system or whatever. Go back and watch the YouTube video of maybe how I built it or whatever, but to make sure it fit, I'd have to have them send it back so I could fit it properly.
And that makes perfect sense, especially in your world where no one expects to, send one of your products. Just give me a new leg for my table. But like, I could see that not working out so well.
And then also finish and wear and the finish to make it match the old finish and all that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You got to just send the whole thing back.
I get questions all the time on the guitar side of things. I make templates for people who want to build guitars, and those templates are based, I'll say loosely, but that's not accurate. They're based on some well-known guitars, and people are always like, well, this is definitely going to fit my 1986 fill in the blank. And it's like, it is not at all going to fit that. I would highly recommend that, the areas on the template where parts have to fit together, put 6 or 7 layers of tape around there, and, make sure that the piece you're cutting has plenty of extra meat on it. And then you're going to have to hand file that thing down to the point where it actually, meets the tolerance. Because I think if you took 100 guitars off the same factory line, they're not going to fit back and forth. They pick a neck and a body that fit well together, and in a lot of cases hand sand them to fit. And yeah, there's no way you can get one off the shelf that's going to do anything for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Look at like auto manufacturing, right? Like people always
Yeah.
complain about the fit and finish of like car parts, but it's like they're trying to make them fit. Like they're making tens of thousands of these. Like they make the tolerances as loose as they possibly can, so that everything fits up when things move and rust and age with time.
I get a kick out of, I have a bunch of friends in the hot rod world that build cars, and everybody complains about replacement fenders for 1960s cars. And I'm like, what has that car been through? And there is some justification for a lot of it. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of really bad car parts out there, but when something's off by a couple fractions, it's like, how many times has that car been hit? How many times was it run into the edge of the garage door, or grocery carts hitting it, or, fill in the blank, or on the back country roads with the teenagers. And anyway, I'm just amazed that they still are making parts for some of those old cars. And anyway, that tolerance bug is a deep hole to go down as well. Holy mackerel.
Yeah. So since we're talking about old things, trying to segue around to a question I wanted to ask earlier when we were talking about your old job, because I think this came from your old job. But your very first YouTube video, you have a thing called an inverted pendulum from 16 years ago.
Oh
Or
yeah.
Inverted pendulum. What the heck is that thing? There was no explanation on that
Yeah.
video, but it was like the most intriguing looking thing. I have no idea.
That was one of the projects I had when I was in school. So we had a robotics elective, and that's the one I took because I was big into robots. Still big into robots, obviously.
Yeah.
But one of my projects was it like a pendulum, but an inverted pendulum. So it would balance. Segway is the best. They didn't exist at that point, but Segway is a perfect example of that. And I wanted to do it with a control algorithm that was far more simple, and it shouldn't have worked, but it did. So I shot a video of it, and that was like 2 days before the project was due, and I ended up putting it on YouTube to prove to my professor that it did indeed work. But yeah, it was just that's what you see is all it does is just a two-wheeled robot that just balances upright, just like a Segway.
Do you think Segway ripped you off after they saw
God
that?
no, God no, they're doing so much more. That was just I was using an infrared sensor bounced into the ground, measuring the distance to the ground, and then using the wheel speed in a kind of a loop to figure out if it was leaning one way or the other. And it's an interesting problem. It's a really common control systems problem. So my professor was big into it. That's what he did for his thesis project. So I got extra points because he liked it.
Excellent.
That's awesome. Well, I'm looking at the clock. We've been on for about an hour. I don't know if there's definitely more ground to cover. I think we could do this for 6 or 8 more hours, and I'd still have questions and things I want to talk about. But
Oh, it's so fun chatting with you guys. Yeah.
Likewise. And so I don't know, Brian, is there any other questions you want to ask before we wrap up?
I do. I have one more question.
Okay.
And I asked this of a machinist we had, Tony Verleau, and he gave me a very politically correct answer, which was fine, but it was the wrong answer. So I'm going to give you a hint on the answer. But the question is, to be a master machinist, do you machine in imperial or metric? Here's my hint.
I like the hint. All my equipment here is imperial, so that's just my brain goes to. I mean, Canada, so we're kind of bilingual on the measurement system here. Yeah, I don't know. I interchange between them both. I mean, millimeters are superior, but it's got to be.
Yeah.
I'll go with what the machines say.
Okay. Yeah. Because I was curious because you kept talking in imperial increments, and then on your YouTube channel you talk in imperials a lot of times, but you live in Canada in the metric system. So I thought, interesting.
Yeah. We used to go to the lumber store, sells 2x4s. Everything is measured in inches. It's a messed up system. It's we gotta switch or just whatever. But
yeah. I find that my Canadian and British friends are very good inter-unit speaking. That's the wrong way to say it, but very good at interchanging the units. I'm marginal at it, but my British and Canadian friends are very good.
Oh, we have to get it inundated with either or. Like it's just sometimes
Yeah.
the supplier doesn't have a 1/8 end mill, but they got a 3 millimeter end mill. It's like, well, I could probably make that work too. So
Oh my goodness. Now my brain is swirling. How do you do corrections for wear? Oh geez, if you're using, anyway. let me substitute this for that. Oh gosh. Okay. Sounds good. Well, cool. We'll wrap it up on Brian's trick question there. But Kirk, it was fantastic having you on the show. And for anybody out there, again, Curt's YouTube and Instagram is Confounded Machine. You can also find his website, and you can stalk his website for when he opens up his purchasing windows and gives people the ability to buy pens. I think right now, though, you're actually making pens that are just going to go up for sale, which is kind of something that I haven't seen maybe in a while from you, but that's kind of cool too.
yeah, I'm gonna try to do stock. I haven't been successful in years now, but I'm gonna just try to do that. Just frequent releases in stock, because pre-sales are great. It's just yeah, I'd like to switch the system up for a little bit here until I get the new pen design exactly where I want it to be. So
that'll be awesome. Well, again, I'm Greg Porter. You can find me at Skyscraper Guitars and at Greg's Garage on YouTube and Instagram.
And I'm Brian Benham. You can find me everywhere at Benham Design. And you're listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. We'll have links to all of Confounding Machines, Instagram and YouTube, and where else are you at? You have your website. We'll have links to that at our website in the show notes at themakersquest.com. Thanks for listening.
thank you so much for having me, you guys.